We'll be talking a little bit about the basics of Adagio GridView and how to get started and how to get set up in using Adagio GridView. And what we plan on covering today's session is just a little bit about just introducing and essentially spending some time creating brand new inquiries. In terminology, they're called views, and just sort of figuring out how to select the proper program, the proper data file for creating your inquiry. And then looking at some of the features that are available for customizing your inquiry view, whether it's just which columns to show, how to be able to show just particular records, customers that meet criteria or items that meet criteria and so forth, how to create different columns that calculate your database values, and how to do a summary. So if you want to have one row per customer, or one row per item, or one row per order, and do things like that, just the ways that you can summarize. We'll take a look a little bit about how to send the information in your GridView directly to an Excel spreadsheet. And we'll also take a look at how to combine two or more inquiries together in something called a workspace, so that not only can you show them together, but you can also connect them as well. And so that's what we plan on covering over the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. So why don't we just do a short overview as far as what GridView is all about, and then we'll get right into the program. In general, Adagio GridView, a purpose is for just doing inquiry instant data lookups. Its biggest benefit is that it's very fast, whereas a professional report writer, something like Crystal Reports, its main benefit is that you can create a professional-looking report that's got bar graphs or pie charts, or you can do all sorts of different colors, and the presentation, the printout, is paramount. In Adagio GridView, certainly you can print the output. Certainly you can export the information to Excel to print there or to distribute, but it looks like a grid is not necessarily professional looking at printed output. GridView it is best used in a situation where you just want to know the data quickly. It doesn't really matter what it looks like as far as whether it's got the right font or the right pie chart or anything like that. Certainly you can export a GridView inquiry to Excel and use that in order to generate pie charts or other reports and so forth. To use Adagio GridView, you don't have to have access to the Adagio accounting database. You don't have to know how to use Adagio or be trained to use the accounting software. You have the opportunity of accessing your accounting data outside of the program. And so if there's a certain staff person or a group of staff people that don't need to be given access to the accounting program, but there is particular pieces of information, maybe some information about your customers or about your vendors that would be good for them to be able to look up. The Adagio GridView is a great tool for that you can have this spreadsheet-looking output of data sitting on their desktop, but they don't actually get into the program. So it's a way of being able to provide Adagio data access without having to require the user know how to use the accounting program or to be given access to the program. And when you run Adagio GridView, it does not edit or lock the database. So you could have someone looking at the customer records, and simultaneously one of your other staff people can be posting batches or printing reports or other processing at all. Using Adagio GridView does not prevent processing from other staff people. You don't have to tell everyone to get out of GridView so they can post a batch. So you should be aware that it's completely seamless in regards to being able to get access to the data without having to prevent people from doing their work as well. And you can do it on any Adagio database file. Adagio GridView uses the same data dictionaries for reporting that are used by the program itself for being able to load the grids and editing and finders and so forth. So you can use Adagio GridView to look at any database file in any field that is in each of the files. So if you want to look up it and have on your screen anything at all. It could be a customer list or an order list. It could be the terms codes or the reordered data numbers or whatever information that you might want to get out of your Adagio accounting. You can look at it with GridView because it uses the same data dictionaries as what the program actually uses for writing to the database files. Adagio GridView is also interesting to use as an export to Excel tool. So if you just simply need to get data out from Adagio and get it into an Excel spreadsheet, then it's very simple to do because GridView can look at any database file, and then therefore you can then send the contents of that inquiry to an Excel spreadsheet. So if you need to create information just as a data dump to get all of your customers out into Excel, or maybe you want to export a batch so that you can organize it in such a way that you can re-import this Excel file as a batch using the Adagio import batch processing or import customers or whatever it is you might need to do, you can use it as a way to generate an Excel file for the purposes of re-importing back into Adagio if you wish. Or any other purposes for why you might want to have company data in an Excel spreadsheet. So why don't we get into the program now? It's way more fun looking at it rather than just simply talking about it. I'll be demonstrating using the current version of Adagio GridView, version 9.0b. When you start Adagio GridView, it's just like any other Adagio program where you need to sign into the database using a user ID and password. And I will be demonstrating using some sample data. This one will happen to be Adagio order entry sample data, but certainly it would work anywhere else. And when you first start Adagio GridView, often it will be quite a big blank screen, and then it's a matter of, okay, well, where do we go from here? So what we're going to do is we're just going to simply create a very simple view, and we'll base it on the AR customer list. And so how do we go about generating an inquiry on your, say, your customer list? Well, it's usually a three-step process where you can click New from the toolbar or the File menu and do New. And whenever you choose one of those, you'll be taken to step one, which is choosing the program for where you want to generate your inquiry. Using Adagio GridView does require that you know a little bit about where things are kept in your company, knowing that customers are stored in Adagio receivables, knowing that your items are stored in Adagio inventory, knowing that your vendors are stored in Adagio payables, and so forth. When you choose to select a module, it will show a list underneath the dotted line of all the data dictionaries that are installed in Adagio. And that have ever been installed by Adagio or installed by Adagio GridView. At the very top will be the most recently 5 used dictionaries. So if you're using the same dictionaries over and over again, then like say that you quite often do Adagio sales analysis inquiries, instead of having to hunt through a long list here, then you just have the opportunity of picking ones from the top that you most recently have used. So in this particular case, we wanted to do a customer list, and our customers are stored in Adagio receivables, and the current version right now is 9.0a, so I can just double-click on that list to select it. Step 2 from creating an inquiry is to choose the table within Adagio receivables where the information that you want to output is stored. In general, you will have one database file available in each table. And so if you want to see a cache batch, you notice that they actually are stored in 2 different files, a header and a detail. So if you wanted to do an inquiry based on your cache batches, you would actually end up needing to create 2 inquiries, one based on the detail and one based on the header. Or if you wanted to do one on the posting journal, or if you want to do one on the terms code, or the so on. You'll notice that at the very bottom of the list, where the characters AR for Adagio receivables don't have a slash in between, these are called composite tables, and they actually are 2 or more Adagio receivables tables combined together. So if you wanted to do the customer transactions at the same time as the customers, so you need to have like the customer name and their terms code and their credit limit perhaps, in addition to outstanding transactions, their due dates and amount of owings and so forth. You can use what we call a composite table in order to be able to combine 2 or more tables together within the same single inquiry window. You'll notice that with the customers, there's actually a few different records. There's something called a customer master, which is all of the customer records. You'll notice that there's also something called a customer extension 2. I believe that's required if you happen to be using Adagio Sales CQ, and there's certain fields stored on your customers that aren't stored in Adagio Receivables, are actually used for Adagio Sales CQ. There's all sorts of other things such as the alerts that you could potentially have pop up for your customers, the customer notes, the amounts for their recurring charges, and so forth. If you're not quite sure which ones to use and where the fields that you want to use and what tables to select, what I'd recommend doing is in the SoftTrack system directory, there is an application called a data dictionary exporter. And this is something that all Adagio programs install. It'll be called data dictionary exporter.exe. You can also create a shortcut to it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply launch it and type in your company data. Make sure I set my password correctly. You can browse for your data path if you wish. Or you can just type it in if it's easier to do so. And the purpose of the data dictionary exporter is to generate a table list and a field list of all of the available fields so you know where to look. And all the dictionaries that are available will be listed here. If you want to see what Adagio Receivables 9.0 field list looks like, I just have to highlight the dictionary I want to create and click the Export button. And this will launch Microsoft Excel, and it will generate one tab for each of the tables that are stored within the particular dictionary that you chose to export. And so this is just a way of identifying, well, I know I want to get the customer number and the name and do all the fields that I want to have. Am I picking the right one? So depending on the size of the dictionary, it might take a little while to generate a list of all the fields and all the tables. See, we're almost there. It's alphabetically created. Okay, so we're at the composite tables now. So what you'll see it does is it creates a first tab that has the actual overall writing, and then you can see on a row-by-row basis you have a one row for each of the different tables that are available, and these are just simply links to other tabs in the same workbook. And if I want to see if this is the right customer file, I can click on AR Customer Master, and then it will take you to that tab in the workbook and such forth. You can see a list of all the fields and the types of information they are, and if there's any special information. And at the very bottom, it will show you lookup tables, so you know that if you see a customer type of 0 in your database, you know what it means, or an aging type, so forth. So you can see that there's certain things that you can do on your customer list, and it will interpret also values that are translated for you in Adagio GridView. So just so you're aware that if you're not quite sure where to find fields, so that when you do your inquiry, this data dictionary exporter is a great tool in order to identify that list. And you can print out this if you require, just save it for later. So it looks like that the customer master is the table that we want to use. So why don't we select that? And then step 3 of our process of creating an inquiry is to simply select the fields that we want. And so, of course, what's required for you may be different than what you might want to inquire for different purposes. Typical things you might want to know about your customer, well, let's see. The customer number would be important. Their name would be important as well, too. If they have a secondary name, then you can include that as well. Their credit limit looks good, and their balance outstanding. It doesn't matter what order that you select them in. You can always reorganize the columns later, so it doesn't matter if you realize, oh, I really wanted to have balance outstanding before credit limit, that's okay. When the inquiry is created, you can reorganize the columns the way that you want. What other information you might want to know? How about their telephone number, the salesperson associated with them, their contact maybe. All I'm doing is double-clicking on the fields to add it from the available list, and over here is the list of fields that have been selected. If you realize, oh, I didn't really want the contact after all, I can double-click on that, or I can highlight the field and then click the left arrow in order to send it back to the main list. So there's all sorts of different fields, at least for the customers. You can see all the statistical units. Maybe it'd be interesting to see something like when was the last time that they gave us a payment. So there's a few fields that are available. One thing that you also want to see is that the way that these fields are organized or the way that they are stored in the database. If you want to be able to look for fields alphabetically, and you're not quite sure where the balance outstanding or where the salesperson field is, you can click the Sort Fields button, and this will sort all of the fields alphabetically here, so it'll be easier, hopefully, to be able to look for the last adjustment date. Or, of course, you'll need to know what the name of the field is, but that will become a little bit more obvious as you get more used to using Adagio GridView. So you can choose to sort these fields alphabetically directly from this Select Fields screen. Okay, so why don't we just say this for now. If you ever realize that you need to come back and add more fields, you can always come back to the definition and select more fields as required. You're not stuck with having to recreate it from scratch if you realize that you forgot to add one column to your report. So at this point, after our 3 steps, we've gotten ourselves to the definition. We've told the Adagio GridView that we want to create an inquiry based on the Adagio Receivables Customer Master Table, and these are the fields that we want to select. There are some options here that I think for the most part are self-explanatory, but let me just highlight a couple of them that are interesting just to be aware. You need to include the totals for numeric fields. Obviously what they do is for number columns, they will create a grand total at the bottom. You need to have this option turned on if you want to be able to summarize and do subtotals by customer or subtotals by territory or subtotals by something. This option needs to be turned on. When you first open a view, do you want to have the most current up-to-date be reread from your company database? If so, refresh on open will be interesting, and auto-refresh means complete every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes or a certain time frame that you would like to have Adagio GridView reread the data for you. Then it will automatically do that if it's important that your inquiry has the most up-to-date and live data. Your customer list probably doesn't change all that frequently. Your orders on file probably will. So depending on the type of inquiry you're creating will likely depend on whether you require this or not. It's also probably not a good idea to have auto-refresh on really large databases like sales analysis or order history, because as soon as it finally reloads, it will probably be time to reload again. So large databases like that probably aren't too interesting to have auto-refresh on. Save without data is an interesting option if you're doing an inquiry on a large company database such as Adagio Sales Analysis or Order History or Inventory Transaction History. And once you've finished working with the view and you save it and close, you may not want to worry about having megabytes worth of data saved in a view that's not even being used. And so having saved without data is just a way to save a few megabytes for each inquiry if you don't need to have the actual data saved with the inquiry when it's not in use. And lastly here for definition, there's an option here called Translate Coded Fields. We saw when we exported the table to Excel that there are certain things called lookup tables, and there are certain fields that have a translation built into it. So if a transaction type is 0, it means it's an invoice, or if it's a 1, it's a credit note, or 2, it's a debit note. And instead of having to guess for yourself what those numbers mean, we have put in some translation tables into the tables themselves, and if you want to have the word invoice appear for the transaction type instead of a 0 or an I, then you can have this option, Translate Coded Tables, turned on such that the words or more descriptive meanings of certain type fields will appear instead of the codes 0, 1, 2, or I, C, D, and so forth. So why don't we go ahead and continue on and create our inquiry. When I click OK here, it won't start loading quite yet. What it will do first is it will give you the opportunity of defining a filter. We'll talk about filters a little bit later on, but essentially the purpose of a filter is to limit the number of rows that are displayed in an inquiry. We allow you the opportunity of creating a filter here because you might be pointing this inquiry at a very large database such as order history, and you don't want to have 100,000 records all of a sudden blow up onto your window. I mean, for every record that gets loaded, that takes a little bit of memory, and of course it'll take a little bit longer to load, and a little bit longer to refresh. And if you know that you're going to be working on a large database, you might want to just simply create a filter that says maybe shows only the orders for a certain customer or for this year or for this month, and just work on and inquire with just a few records, and then when you know that things are working and your calculated columns are fine and so forth, then you can create the filters that you actually require. It's just a way of making things go a little bit faster while you're creating the inquiry at the beginning. Because I'm working on sample data and the data isn't too large, I'm not going to worry too much about creating this filter now, but we will come back to it in just a few minutes. So I'll just cancel from this particular screen. And now what we see is our inquiry that now shows selected columns based on our customer list. And of course you can resize and reposition these windows as desired. What can you do with this inquiry? Well, at this point now is your opportunity to rearrange columns if you wish. If you say you want to move the telephone number over a little bit, you just have to highlight the column and then drag it over, and where the red line is where you can drop it to. And so you can rearrange columns such as this. Or maybe we want the credit limit over here. Maybe we'll put the salesperson over on the far left-hand side. So you can reorganize columns such as this. If you want to be able to sort columns in a certain way, or all the records in a certain way, by default it will sort by the index field, which in this case is customer number. So let's say you want to sort them all by customer name. All I need to do is to double-click on the title bar, and now all the customers will be sorted by name. You'll see that Ronald J. Langley now sorts down here at the bottom, even though that their customer number isn't in the numbering sequence. Or maybe you want to sort by the telephone number or by the balance outstanding. You can see that when you double-click, it will sort it by a ascending, or I can double-click again on the title, and that now sorts things descending. Or you can sort by dates as well, ascending or descending. Or if you sorted by a field such as salesperson, now you can see all the customers are grouped into a organization where you have a certain salesperson and all the customers that belong to that salesperson, and then the next salesperson and all the customers that belong to them, and so on and so forth. To get back to where you originally have the default sort, you can just simply press the F9 keyboard, which is the refresh, and then that will take it back to our original sort. If you realize you want to add new fields, let's say, oh, I really would have liked to have had the territory on this inquiry as well. What you can do is you can go back to the Edit, Definition, or press the shortcut key, F4, in order to get back to the definition where we were just a couple minutes ago. And then to add another field, it's just a matter of clicking Fields, and we're going to look for territory. Why don't I sort the fields just so I can find territory a little bit easier? There it is. So I can add it to the list. Say OK, and then new fields that are added in such a way will always be added to the right, and then at this point you can position it where you require. So maybe we'll add it over here. And of course, territory is a field you can choose to sort by if you wish. If you know that your inquiry always wants to be sorted a certain way, maybe sorted by multiple fields, not just a single field, what you can do is you can select a column and right-click on the title. And in the pop-up menu, there will be something here called Set Sort Order. And if I choose this, then what you'll see is that a little green line gets added to the top of the column, and that means when I press F9, instead of sorting the default way by customer number, it will sort by the column or multiple columns that you have set the sort order for. In this case, there's that green line. And so by default, you can see it sorting by the salesperson. If you want to say sort by salesperson and then by territory, what I can do is I can highlight both columns, right-click, and say Set Sort Order. And now you can see there's two green lines, one over the salesperson column and one over the territory column. When I press F9, that will resort. And so in the case of this salesperson here, AVB, there's this territory, United States Eastern, and then United States Northern Central. And so this is a way that you can say group columns by more than one column. You can also choose to include numeric fields in this sort order. So let's say I want to say sort by salesperson and also the balance outstanding. I use the control key to multi-select those columns and right-click and set the sort order and press F9. And you can see now that it's sorted first by salesperson and my balance outstanding ascending. If I wanted to sort it descending, I can just right-click on the title bar. Instead of ascending, I can choose descending. And then when I press F9, now we can see each salesperson and then the customers sorted in a balance outstanding descending order. So there's lots of different ways that you can organize the records so that they are sorted in various ways. Next thing I'd like to do is to show you that you can limit the information that you see on the screen. Right now there is a total of 38 records available, and maybe you're only interested in seeing a certain section of those customers. Maybe, for example, you are a salesperson and you only want to see your customers. You don't care about the status of any other customers that belong to different salespersons. In order to do that, we need to create something called a filter that will restrict the certain records that you want to see. So in order to create a filter, you can either go to the Edit menu and click Filters here, or you can press the F6 shortcut key, or you can find this button that's on the toolbar, and it looks like a magic wand here. And any one of those three ways will load up a named filters window. You can have more than one filter that you can choose to select from as required. So let's just create a few just so you can see where the benefits of using these filters come in. So let's just remove the default one that's called Remove Filter 1. And we'll create one that's called Salesperson RD. And so basically what we can do is we can create a filter that says just select the codes that belong to Salesperson Code RD. It uses formulas in a way that's very similar to Excel. If you want to do comparisons that way, you don't have to put an equal sign in here at all. There's lots of different things. All of the fields that you have in your database for the table that you selected to report off of is listed here. And there's also some predefined comparisons and the numeric operations, and also other functions as well. In order to do a simple comparison is what we're doing here. We can say, well, where's the salesperson code? There it is. I can just double click on that, and that will insert this into this big formula box here. This is where the text is. You don't have to insert. You can also type it in as well. It's just a notepad. You can also copy and paste in there as well. Because I'm wanting to compare it to some text as opposed to a number or a date, the filter that I do would have the comparison I want to compare against will need to be surrounded in double quotes. Now this actually isn't going to find anything, but I just wanted to do this just to show you what will happen if you enter in a filter and you realize, wait a second, nothing got selected. And the reason why nothing got selected is because the salesperson code, if we right-click and look at the field properties, has a length of 6, and RD, of course, is only 2 characters. And the fact that the type is an R character means that it's a right-justified field, which means it has leading spaces if you don't use all 6 characters. To get back all of your records without any filters, you can click this toggle filter button just to the left of your filter drop-down list, and that will bring them all back. And you can see that there's a bunch of leading spaces in front of RD. So what we wanted to do is to adjust our filters such that we get rid of those leading spaces. So let's go back to the Edit Filters and edit that. And certainly one thing I could do is to insert 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces in front of RD so that it does an exact match comparison. When GridView does these filters or formulas to do text comparisons, it's exact matching. It will be looking for spaces leading or trailing or within. It's also case sensitive as well, so you're aware of that. But if you're not quite sure whether you need to put in leading spaces or trailing spaces or where you need to put them, what you might want to do instead is to apply a function to the salesperson field that says, well, get rid of all those spaces before I do my comparison. If you're not quite sure how to do text manipulation and you want to see what sort of available functions are available to manipulate text within the functions, you can highlight all the different field functions that can do things to text. And down at the very bottom of the list, there's one here called trim. And the trim function is one that you'll use quite often in GridView. And the trim says we'll get rid of any leading or trailing spaces. And the S refers to a string, which basically means text. So if I put in the word trim and put it right before the salesperson code and put in an open-end parenthesis, and then the field code salesperson code, and then a closing parenthesis, then what we're doing now, let me just add a couple of extra spaces to the formula here so you can see it a little bit easier. We'll take the salesperson code and apply the trim function to it, which means get rid of all the spaces, and then compare it to the characters RD. And so this should now select the customers that we want. So now if we toggle the filter, now we can see only the customers associated with salesperson RD are now listed on the grid. I'll press F6 to get back here. And if I wanted to do it for a different salesperson code, I can copy, Control-C, and then create a new one and call it salesperson AVB. And Control-V to paste in the text. And then simply overwrite the one thing I was comparing with before to a different code. And save that. And so now I've got two filters that I could potentially pick from the list. So if I want to look at the customers that belong to a different salesperson, I can choose to do so here, or go back to the first one. And so this is where the named filters get some powers, because if you wanted to see a different grouping of customers that meet a different criteria, it's just a matter of using the drop-down field and selecting them. There are ways to be able to have the user of the inquiry be able to select the appropriate salesperson code. Let's just go back to the filters. And so we'll just paste that in. Instead of hard coding in the code here, you might want to prompt the user for what to type in. And so instead of hard coding that in, what you can potentially do instead is in the query area, there's something called query string, which basically is a prompt for the user to type in some text. There's also two other functions for having them type in a number or selecting a date. So the query string says basically the only thing you need is what's the prompting text? Enter the salesperson code, double quotes. And so instead of saying RD or AVB, this query string will prompt the user to type in something. So now if I choose this one from the list, now we can see enter the salesperson code, that's the prompting text. I can type in AVB and enter and then select that. Or if I want to refresh it, press F9 and say I want LOB. Done. So that's just a way of being able to prompt text. So that's a very simple type of filter that you might potentially do. Let's create a couple more. We may want to see, let me just untoggle this, a list of all the customers that have a balance outstanding greater than the credit limit. That's something interesting to know about customers. So let's see all the customers that are over their credit limit. So again, what type of comparison are we doing? We want balance outstanding greater than credit limit. That's a fairly simple one. And so now if I select that from the list, now we have a list of all of the customers that meet that criteria. You could also do additional filters that say, show me all the customers that haven't paid me in the last 60 days, or all the customers that have a balance outstanding greater than 0 and haven't paid me in the last 60 days. So you can envision all the different types of things that you can do. One last one just to show you an example of doing multiple criteria. We've got many salespersons, and we've got a few that are over the credit limit. Let's say that we'd like to see all the customers over their credit limit but belong to a specific salesperson. So we can do that. So we'll do new and say select SP over limit. Actually, what we do first is copy this saving time, so we'll Control copy that. So we'll try this again. Select SP over limit. So we've got two criteria that we want. One, we want to have the person enter in the salesperson code, and we also want to have balance outstanding greater than the credit limit. Well, how do you connect these two criteria together? Well, just like in Excel, what you need to do is to use an AND function. And so an AND says there's going to be two or more comparisons, and the record has to match all of the comparisons in order to be selected. So in order to use this, AND in an open parenthesis, then your first criteria, and then a comma, and then your second criteria, and then if you wanted a third one, a fourth one, and so forth, just separate them all by commas. And then when we get to our end, we use closed parenthesis. Now you notice what I've done here is that I have separated things out on multiple lines. Adagio GridView doesn't care about line breaks or extra spaces when it comes to the correctness of the syntax of a formula. And so doing something like this might make the formula a little bit more readable in the case where, oops, you accidentally typed in an extra comma or you're missing a bracket or that sort of thing. Generating the formula look something like this will make it a little bit easier in order to make it readable in case you forgot a character or forgot something. So if I pick this new one here, select SP over limit, I can type in the code, and not only will it select just the customers that belong to that particular salesperson, but it will also select them based on the idea that they are over their balance outstanding. Or if I refresh again and type in AVB, okay, this particular salesperson doesn't have any customers over their credit limit. So there's a few examples of some filters that are available. The next topic I'd like to investigate is something called a calculated column. What this is the ability of taking information and creating a calculation. There may be information that you want to know about the customer, but it's not specifically stored in the database. For example, you may want to see how much a customer is over their credit limit, or in the case of the customers that are under their credit limit, how much room they have left. So you can do a simple arithmetic calculation that says how much of their balance is underneath the credit limit. In order to create a new column that does a calculation, you can go to the Edit menu and pick Calculated Columns, or you can use the F8 shortcut key, or you can find this kind of wrench and grid button on the toolbar. There it is, for Calculated Columns. So any one of those three will work. And the way of using the calculated columns is exactly the same as what we saw for the filters. Over on the left-hand side, you'll have your field list and the function list if you need to refer to those. You give it a name, maybe the room left, and then whatever arithmetic or other calculation that you want to do. So in this case, the credit limit minus the balance outstanding. Okay, so when I say OK to this, it will create the column, and it will do the math in this case in order to generate the amount of dollars that the customer is underneath their credit limit. And in the case of customers that are over their credit limit, of course, this will be a negative number. Something I should also show you, too, is once you've created one or more calculated columns, those will be available to be used as filters. So if I wanted to do a filter based on this particular column, I now have the opportunity of doing so. So just so you're aware that instead of doing the over credit limit using the calculation here comparison, I could also do a similar type of over limit based on the fact that this new column that we've generated is negative, less than 0. So if I pick that one as well, over limit, it will pick the exact same information based on, you can see the exact same records. You can also do calculated columns based on dates. If you want to see how many days it's been since they've created it, had a payment, what you can do is do something called date math, and that's a formula where you do one date minus another date. That will generate a number, which is the number of days difference. Now, this is sample data, so the numbers will be quite big, but just so you're aware. Days since last payment. So if we look at the date types of formulas, there's one here called today. So I can double-click that. So today minus my last payment date. So let's go and look for that. Past payment date there. Okay. And so the days since our last payment, actually I can even make the title bar a little bit taller so it fits. And we'll highlight that and get rid of some of the decimals. So in the case of sample data, of course, these numbers are very large, but you can see that we've done a formula that compares two dates, and then the result of that is the number of days in between the two dates that we are subtracting. So that's a useful type of formula that you'll, I think, fairly frequently use in some views. The last thing I wanted to highlight is the ability to generate a summary. So if you want to do a subtotal based on certain columns, why don't I just change the sort order by salesperson only. If you have a set sort order turned on in your view, then you can also, from the toolbar, click this Summarize button. And when I do so, it will generate one row for every column that has this green line. So in this case, it will do one row for each salesperson, and then I can double-click on the pluses in order to drill down and see the customers that make up that salesperson. Or I can double-click to suppress. So basically what we have here is the one row per salesperson and then the subtotals by salesperson. And I can unsummarize that to show. For numeric fields, not only do I have the ability of doing totals, but I can also do other summary operations such as a minimum or a maximum or an average. And so in the case of, say, I'll do the minimum room left and the average days since last payment. You can see they have different colors based on the different summary operation. And when I summarize, you can see that those numbers are also. So in this case, for salespersons, this is the minimum customer for the amount of room left and the average number of days since last payment overall for the entire salesperson. So there's different calculations that you can do using these summary operations. So we've done some work on this. We probably don't want to lose this. So at this point now, let's save our inquiry. You can just click the Save button on the toolbar. And by default, it will save it in a folder that's set up in a defaults area, and I'll go to that in just a moment. And down here below, we can give it any name that we want. It can be as many characters as long as you want. So I can have Customer Demo Inquiry. The only thing that you need to do when you save one of these GridView views is to have a .gv as the file extension, and that's a requirement for saving a view. But apart from that, you can call it whatever you want. And I'll just press F5 to refresh it. The reason that I saved and then cleared when I saved it is because in the definition, it says save without data. So essentially what that means is every time you click the Save button, it will clear out the data. When you're working with a brand new view and just getting it ready, you probably want to just keep that off. And then when you know that it's working, then if you wish to turn this on, then you can. And just to highlight where you can set up your defaults, from the Edit menu there's a Defaults, and down here below is the default location where you can load and save your views to. So if you say Open, it will first look at this directory. Or if when you do Save, it will default look at this directory. There's also some things here that you can see that mostly are self-explanatory. How many of the views do you want to have on your auto recent file list? When you first started Adagio GridView, do you want it to do something? In our case, we didn't have it do anything, but you may want to have it automatically load the new view window, or the open view window, or the recent files or recent workspaces list. So there's some things that you can do when you first start into GridView. Okay, so what we have now is a single customer view, and what we're going to do now is we're going to connect it to another one and create something called a workspace. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a new, and let's say that we'd be interested in seeing outstanding invoices or transactions out of the order entry history file. So what we can do is wherever we want to look, let's say that we want to look up order entry. So we'll find our most current order entry dictionary. And we want to take a look at their invoicing history. And so you can see as we look here, there is a couple of history files, one that says history detail, that's the item history, or you can do the order history, just the header, or the master, which is the header and the header extension. If we go down the very bottom, we can see that there's also composite tables that have history, detail, and the header combined, and that sounds interesting. Or the history, detail, and header, and the header extension, which has things like email addresses and so forth. So why don't we pick this composite table that has the history, detail, and the header information all at the same time. And so from here you can see that the field list is much longer. It has all of the detail fields, and then all of the header fields, and then the extension fields, such as what you see here. So why don't we pick a few things that we might want to look up in regards to order history. Let's do, from the header side, the document type. Actually do the custom number first. Document type, and so I do the document number and the document type. And maybe the date, the order date and the invoice date. So maybe those are some interesting things. The salesperson associated with the sale. And from the details, let's say the line number, the item number and the description. And let's do the quantity shipped and an amount. Let's do the extended price. So there's just an example of maybe a few things that you might be interested in seeing. And this will take a little bit longer because it's order history, although with sample data it's not too bad. And we can see it doesn't quite fit on the screen, so we get a scroll bar. A tip that I quite often do is I can move the height of the title bar so that fields such as doc type, I can reorganize that so that I can see the entire title wrap onto 2 lines. Quantity shipped. Customer 2, I can do that one as well. And extended price, how are we doing here? Not quite yet. And maybe we'll just make the description a little bit less wide. So there, we've got it fitting on one screen. Why don't we go ahead and save this? And we'll call it OE History Demo. So now we've got 2 windows. Let's just save without data and refresh that. So now we've got 2 windows open on our desktop simultaneously, and it may be interesting to have both of these open at the same time. And in order to remember where the size of these windows and the position of those windows, what we can do is we can save this as something called a workspace. And so maybe we'll call it Customers and OE History. And a workspace has a GVS file extension, and essentially the purpose of a workspace is to say, all right, let's have the customers window open up here and it's this size, and let's have the order entry history window open up here with this size. So I'll go ahead and save that. So just to show you how a workspace just very basically works, let's just close it, and we'll just make save changes. So when we want to open up that, we'll just open workspace. We can see there's the customers and OE history one that we just saved a moment ago. And so we can see that both of those windows open up in their appropriate positions. What you can do when you've got 2 windows such as this that have common information, you can link and do basically a runtime filter from one window to another. So let's say, for example, you want to see all the transactions that belong to a particular customer. You can do so by linking. Now, all you need to have is a column in both windows that have the same field name. In this case, customer numbers here, and this one has got a number 2 after it, just because that's an internal name. So what I can do is I can right-click and rename and just get rid of that 2. So I can leave customer number. And then what I can do now is if I click on any cell in this customer list and right-click, I can define a link and browse to my OE history inquiry. And if I do that, it will add a little red line to the bottom of the title. And the real reason why I want to do that is, let's say I want to see all of the order entry history based on CCS Express customer. I just have to double-click on this cell, and now you can see it selected all of the history for just that customer. Maybe let's sort this by the document type. So we'll set a sort order here by document type. Or if I want to see it for Ronald J. Langley or Kate Mahan, or if you can even see multiple customers. So if I want to say I want to see the history for that customer and that customer, I just have to hold down the Shift key, double-click, and now you can see the history being shown for both customers. Doing this sort of linking and being able to load order entry history based on customer selection or so forth is way faster doing it this way rather than creating a filter that says customer number equals CCX01. The reason is it takes advantage of the indexes that are available and the memory that is already saved in your workstation in having the view loaded. And so doing this sort of linking, not only is it easier to do just by doing a double click, it's also going to be faster, and it also gives you the flexibility of being able to shift click and select multiple customers, or even control click and do multiple customers. I can do links using multiple columns if I wanted to. So maybe if I wanted to use the salesperson code to link in order entry history, I can do the same sort of thing from this column. So I can right-click, define link, and browse to the same order entry history demo, and say OK. Now if I double-click here, now what we've got is the list of all of the order entry history based on the salesperson. If I only wanted to show orders this year or documents this year, then what I can do is add a filter to this window. Edit, filters, so this year perhaps. So I can say document date. Now where is it here? Down at the bottom. Oops, where is it? Okay, so the order date is greater than the beginning of the year. So we go to our functions. There's a function called begin year, which basically will recognize when today is and will determine what the beginning of the year is, which of course would be January 1st. And I also want the order date to be less than or equal to today. So this is a way that you can do a date range that's kind of like a year-to-date or this year. And of course, because we're wanting to do two comparisons, we'll need to use that and again. How are we doing for time? All right. So there is a filter that will say just pick all the documents for this year. And so these are all the documents for this year. And now I can select just a particular customer, and then now this will show all the documents for the particular customer this year. So you can see that you can do filtering based on a predefined filter at the same time as a click filter as well. There's lots of other ways that you can do linking. Let me just close this workspace. And one of our samples, just to give you an example of slightly more complicated and powerful linking, let me just open a workspace. It's one of our samples. You can find it from the SoftTrack GView views. And if you go into the Adagio folder, there's one here called Sales Inquiry Join. And basically the purpose of this filter is to be able to say, I want to see, in case of this sales analysis, I want to see all the times that this particular customer has bought this particular item. And the way to do that is you need to have 2 or more lists set up, all linking into the same big filter. So in this case, I've got an item list linking into the sales analysis, and I also have the customer going into the same one, and I actually even have the salesperson going into it as well. So when you have that scenario set up where you've got 2 or more lists or views all linking into the same one here, what I can do is do something called a join. And so what that means is I want to see all the times that this item has been bought by this customer and sold by this salesperson. Well, none. Let's see all salespersons for this item and for this customer. So that was pretty straightforward, or if you want to do a quick search into that kind of combination. Or if I want to see all the times that any salesperson has sold to this customer and bought either this item, this item, this item, or this item. How about this item? There we go. There's another one. So you can multi-select items just by simply clicking and then having that work. And so just again to highlight how that works, this particular sales analysis inquiry has items looking into it, and customers looking into it, and salespersons looking into it. And you have the opportunity of clicking in here and selecting here, and then clicking in here, and then just simply holding down the Control key or the Shift key when you actually do your double click in order to do the launch of the link. So again, this is one of our sample forms. You can play with this. You don't have to do it on sales analysis, of course. You can create a similar inquiry that goes into order entry or inventory history or so forth. Okay, the last thing I'd like to just to demonstrate before we shut down the session for today is just to show you about loading those workspaces. Now, once you've gone in and done some work in regards to creating some inquiries or creating some workspaces, now you want to provide access to your staff for being able to load those. Certainly, you can have them load GridView from a work shortcut, go in a file menu, do open workspace, and load it up. But to make it a little bit more convenient to load those workspaces, there's a couple of ways that you can do it to make it even more convenient. One way is to do it from a shortcut from your desktop. And so you can specify not just GridView loading, but you can specify that it's going to load a particular workspace. And so in this particular example, what we're going to do is if you add in a special parameter to the shortcut target that has a /W and then a location of where your workspace is, then it will, when you load the shortcut, not only will it load the sign-on screen, but it will automatically load the workspace that you specified on the shortcut. So if you have got 4 different workspaces that you want to be able to load, you can create 4 different icons, one for each shortcut, and then each shortcut will load a specific workspace. So you can have one shortcut say, show me the customers and the order entry, and another one, show me the sales analysis sales this week. Another one, show me the vendors that we owe money to in the next 7 days, or that sort of thing. How do we set this up? Well, when you create your shortcut for Adagio GridView on your desktop or from the Windows Start menu, just right-click on the shortcut and pick Properties. And on the Shortcut tab, you'll see that there's a target area. And what you can do is you can add in the parameter for the location of the workspace that you've saved. So if we want to load that, what I can do is I can just click on the shortcut, and it will automatically, after I finished signing in, automatically load that workspace for me. I didn't have to go searching for it anywhere. So I'll just close that. Another way that you can load workspaces is by loading it directly into your Adagio program. It's fairly simple to do. All you need to do is to save your workspace and all the views into a single specific folder. And in order to launch it from a particular program, you need to save it into a folder called Views, which is directly underneath the program directory that you want to launch it from. So in this example, If you want to be able to launch a particular workspace directly from Adagio Order Entry, you just create a folder called Views directly under the place where you're running Adagio Order Entry from. In my case, it's from the C Softtrack OEWin directory. You create the Views directory within that, and then you save the workspace directly into the Views folder. If you want to add security to this workspace, perhaps only admin level users should be able to see this workspace in Order Entry, but other users who are just your entry staff shouldn't be able to see this special inquiry. And what you can do is you can incorporate some security into that, such that if you create an additional folder based on the security group name directly under Views and save the workspace in that folder, then only users who belong to the admin security group will be able to see this particular workspace. Once you save the workspace into either of those folders, when you load Adagio Order Entry the next time, you'll get a confirmation message indicating that the Views menu will get updated. And when it comes time to running the Adagio Order Entry, you'll find that underneath the Inquiries menu, then you'll see that there's a menu item called Views, and from there there will be a flyout menu, in which case you can load your particular workspace. So let's just to show you kind of what that will look like. Let's launch into Order Entry. I'll log in as my user. And so underneath the Inquiries menu, you can see Views, and this particular user happens to have access to 2 different workspaces. So I can load the open orders from here. This will launch Adagio GridView, and this will launch the workspace. So those are just a couple of different ways where you can make the launching of the workspaces a little bit easier, having to save your staff the time of having a file open and go browse for it, and just make it easier for being able to load these. So that's the end of our demonstration for today.